Hey everyone, my name is Ben Heisch, and today we are taking a look at a 35mm f2 lens, which is probably just about the perfect lens for the vast majority of people out there. We're gonna talk about this lens, see if it's worthwhile, and I'll give you all of my impressions about it. I know if you are someone that only thinks a Summicron or a Summilux or whatever is the only valid form of lens to put on a Leica, you're gonna hate this video because this is a lens from 7Artisans. It is a lens that I believe is going to be under $300. So if you're the kind of person that is gonna roast me in the comments or try to about that kind of stuff, feel free to move on, because some of us just like to use our tools and go out and might not be able to afford something like a Summicron or something right off the bat, but maybe we can buy a Leica and maybe we have a certain amount of a budget. So this could be a good holdover until you can do that. But let's jump in and see if this lens is actually worth purchasing, even at the $300 price point, because $300 is inexpensive for a lens, but if it sucks, no one should use it. So this is a 7Artisans lens. It looks kind of big, but looks are definitely deceiving here because there is a little bit of a sort of built-in lens hood here, and I'm not sure why the lens is so thick here. It is, I believe, well under 300 grams. It does not, we have no issues with it passing my Leica balance test. It's like I had to push pretty hard to get it to go that way. So it's definitely not cumbersome to carry around in the slightest. So while it does look like it is slightly large for what it is, again, it's sort of just deceiving in that way because it's definitely not a lens that I would have any issue with whatsoever carrying around all day long. And that is sort of like the beauty of a Leica M for a lot of things. One of the last 35mm lenses I reviewed was the TT Artisan 35mm f2 Apo, and that lens was great, but it was really big, and it's just not something that I would want to be carrying around as part of my daily carry. But this is a lens that would fit that bill for sure in terms of just overall size. I also sort of want to commend 7Artisans for going with their whole Wen series that has this little logo on the top. It's definitely a Leica inspired design, I guess, in terms of using that similar font or typeface, I guess, and a lot of the other design things, but I wouldn't say that it's like a Leica ripoff. I kind of like what they did with this and the design where it's, but no one's gonna look at it and go, oh my gosh, that's a Leica lens, but it's also not going to be so far off the platform that it doesn't look right on a Leica, if that makes sense. It does have a built-in focusing tab, which is really, really nice. I appreciate that quite a bit. It focuses down to 0.7 meters, which is as close as a Leica M camera can focus with its rangefinder. And the lens definitely goes down to f2. It is a clicked aperture as well. You don't really hear much of the clicks or anything, but it definitely is clicked. I will say that I wish it was a little bit more clicky because as I went out and shot, there was a few times where I kind of bumped it to, like f2.4 or something like that if I was trying to shoot f2. And so it was sort of easy to bump out of place, so having some harder detents would be nice. But just having aperture clicks on a Chinese-made lens at this price point is something that is not always included. Now, before you run out and buy this for your M3 or M2 or M6 or whatever, it is another one of those lenses that has to be calibrated by the photographer. It's not something you can do on a film camera. You're going to have to use a digital rangefinder camera, not just your Sony or whatever. So it's definitely a pretty huge downside, and they're missing out on a huge part of the market by not calibrating them in the factory, but it just kind of is what it is, and part of the reason why these lenses, I'm assuming, are so inexpensive.
Do you weave yourself into the fabric of who I am? In the light of every pressing dawn, you make me new again. And I should be. Oh, I believe in a kingdom that's coming. All this time, has it been you? All this time, yeah. All this time, has it been you? All this time, yeah.
Now the lens does actually have a ton of aperture blades. I believe it has 10. So as you stop down, you're going to get more circular bokeh. And speaking of bokeh and just general characteristics of this lens, it's pretty standard in a lot of ways. The bokeh is very uniform. It's not very swirly, but you do get a little bit of that kind of vintage look in it, not in the swirliness necessarily, but it's just not like a clinical look, which is not something I would be able to expect out of this anyway, but it is a really clean lens overall. So it's not something that's going to be really offensive either way, but it's also not going to be something that puts out like a ton of character. So take that for what you will. I'll also say that the sharpness on here for a $300 Leica M lens is fantastic. It's not going to be something that you're going to be pixel peeping on a 60 megapixel camera and wowed by the sharpness. But for a, you know, smaller like M10 sensor like this is, or on film, I think the sharpness is plenty. But overall, I do think that this is a really great lens. It's something that I would definitely recommend to a photographer who wants a Leica M camera on a budget, especially if you're going to buy something like an M240 or an M9, which I would personally skip the M9 and go for the 240. That is a completely separate video. But if you're going to look at picking up a digital Leica, maybe for the first time, you're trying to save some money and get in at the lowest cost points, this is definitely a really good option. I would say the only other thing that I would really be considering in this kind of realm would be the Voigtlander Nocton, as well as the Voigtlander 35mm Ultron version 2. That lens is smaller in terms of width, and it's definitely sharper. It has more character actually, but it's going to be double the price, which is still really inexpensive for a Leica M-mount lens. But, you know, it's still double the price. So thanks so much for watching. If you have any more questions about this lens, please leave them in the comments down below. I've got a ridiculous amount of videos coming out soon, so subscribe if you aren't already, and I will see you all on the next one.